Weird Planet by B. Ward. Chapter 1. Crash Landing. Steer point 195 to the northwest. Stabilise her at 200 and slow down for a landing on the first open space shown on the visimeter, directed Casimir Quain over the intercom, adding, "She's leaking pretty badly in both tanks astern, so better cut her speed down to half to save fuel." The interstellar exploration ship Arcticus 9 was in pretty bad shape after nearly a year out in the galaxy on a trip to Midpoint, the exact position of the lost asteroid Libra Minor. During a supersonic gale in the year 2000 AD, the baby planet had broken loose from the inner galactic circle and was now whirling hopelessly milliards of miles away in outer space, carrying nearly 5,000 humans marooned on its 100 miles of surface, marooned on a wildly gyrating spheroid from which all plants and water were being rapidly evaporated by the atomic rays of the outer galaxy beyond the planetary rim. Now, with fuel running dangerously low, the 10-man spaceship was in bad shape and listing dangerously, torn and buffeted by the gravitational pulls of Cerebus Major and the huge red globe of Juno Scintilla. "I've examined our food and water supplies astern," Ludo Lorenzo, the cook, joined them, his bronzed, lean face tense with anxiety. "And most of it's been contaminated by radioactivity when the meteor crossed us 9 hours back. There's only enough for a week at most that gave a safety reaction when I tested it with my Geiger." "That settles it, Cap." Valtimond Carey was second in command aboard the Arcticus, a tall, slim Jovian with the silver hair and ruby-coloured eyes typical of that planet. "We've just about got 1 chance in 100 of making that crash landing on Zilda, but 999 chances of being torn apart by the gravitational pull in the rim if we're afraid to risk the landing before we hit the rim." The 10 men in the spacesuits looked uneasy. They knew that with their neutralizer smashed beyond repair by the encounter with a meteorite earlier on, their chances of escaping disintegration when exposed to the lethal rays emitted by the radioactive planets guarding the rim of the galaxy would be small indeed. Already, faint cracks and fissures were beginning to appear on the inner surface of the streamlined spaceship. Their only hope of survival and making a safe return to their mother planet, Terrace Major, lay in risking a chance landing on Zilda, the only planet that was known to be entirely free from radioactivity among the 500 forming the rough circle of the galactic rim in which they had been wandering the last year in search of the missing asteroid. "I can see Zilda quite clearly now, Cap," Clint Carter, the navigator, said, his eye focused on the television screen set in the control board of the ship. "It seems quite promising, plenty of green and colour, suggesting water and no radioactivity present anywhere. Shall I set her nose down for this clearing, Cap?" Zilda had been deliberately left untouched when, some 10 years back, all the necklace of planetoids surrounding the galaxy had been charged with radioactivity to form a protective fence around the main planets in the inner galactic belt, including Terrace Major, which used to be known as Earth. For the last 2 decades, the lush green planetoid, with its attendant moon Xenia Minor, had been used as a place of exile for political outlaws, space pirates and smugglers whose crimes were not heinous enough for the disintegrating chamber, the equivalent of the old-fashioned gallows and electric chair. Here, plentifully supplied with wild fruits and water in abundance, the exiles were unable, without spaceships, ever to escape the prison and return to the 5 main planets of Jove, Juno, Mars, Mercury and Terrace Major in the inner galaxy. Thor Thorson, last political exile to be rocketed to Zilda 10 years ago, had apparently died there, since no sign of his existence was reflected on the giant planetary visoscope situated on Mount Everest 2 years ago when the last tele-inspection was carried out. Signals on the intercom also failed to reveal any signs of life on the exile planetoid, and to all intents and purposes the tiny sphere was now entirely uninhabited. "We'll have to cruise in our own velocity, Cap, and rely on the gravitational pull to get us there," Carter muttered tersely, swinging back the joystick and tilting the nose of the spaceship to the northeast, "for the engine's stalling badly." The ship swerved sideways, and with a low whine of its radio motors, landed on the green clearing among the pinus and sycamores of Zilda, rolling over like some vast silver locust, its landing skis in the air. Like all ships of the Interplanetary Space Corporation, which built it, the Arcticus was specifically constructed to withstand crash landings, and her cabins being swivel-controlled, the ship was able to land any side up without damaging its mechanism or passengers. "Looks okay to me," Quain commented, surveying his surroundings as the 10 occupants climbed out through the side hatches and, removing their helmets, breathed the pinus-scented oxygen of the green planetoid. "It must be habitable. Look at those plants and that little chap up the tree over there." He pointed to a small reddish-coloured tree mammal, a 6-limbed linctus with big, owlish green eyes, which was perched on a broad green leaf, nibbling at a shoot attached to the stem, too occupied to notice the presence of these invaders from another planet. The plants and flowers surrounding the verdant emerald plateau on which the ship had crash-landed were indeed lovely, and almost tropical in their colouring and luxuriant growth. Huge lilies with pink chalices veined in gold or silver, copper or bronze, swayed on 10-foot-tall stems as thick as a man's arm and filled the close afternoon air with a heady exotic perfume. Other blossoms of rich magenta or fiery flame colour with petal-like lips, or curving tongues open to caress or to consume unwelcome visitors, nodded and swayed rhythmically in the slight breeze, nodding their brilliant heads like masked devil worshippers in some strange voodoo ceremony. "I don't like it here. It gives me the creeps," muttered Quain uneasily, still watching the tree linctus opposite him. "It looks too good to be real here. I've a nasty feeling that any moment the whole setup may turn into a nightmare." The other 9 felt exactly the same way about Zilda. It looked too pretty and tranquil to be safe, like some lovely savage jungle where every step is fraught with danger. Carter shuddered uncomfortably, for he too, like his chief, sensed the menace in the atmosphere around them. The other planetoids of the galaxy, bubbling with red-hot atomic heat and exuding waves of death and destruction for a radius of 5 miles to repel an invasion of the galaxy. These fuming, steaming, incandescent wastes seemed almost welcoming and friendly in comparison with the treacherous, hidden beauty of Zilda. "You're dead right about nightmares, Cap," suddenly shouted Ludo, pointing at the tree opposite. "We're in the middle of one right now." Fascinated, yet struck speechless with horror, the 10 terrestrians watched as the ghastly scene was enacted before their eyes. The little tree mammal, which had been calmly nibbling at a leaf of the plant opposite them, suddenly started to struggle wildly, uttering shrill, mouse-like squeaks while doing so, and seemingly unable to free itself and escape from its invisible attacker. Then, fantastic and incredible as it appeared to be, the 10 onlookers saw that the plant had turned to the tables on the linctus and was beginning to eat its attacker. Slowly and unerringly, the leaves and tendrils began to entwine themselves almost lovingly around the struggling brown, furry little body. Then the huge crimson and gold chalice bowed itself almost caressingly to touch the linctus with its petals. Next, most amazing sight of all, the horrified terrestrians saw a long pendulous petal like a tongue licking the flesh from the wildly writhing body. "For heaven's sake, shoot it with your atomizer," Carter urged Quain, who, as chief of the expedition, was the only one so armed. "I can't stand the sight much longer." But as he spoke, the last remnant of the linctus vanished into the chalice of the 10-foot flower, which moved, or rather shuffled, backwards into the dense shadows of the surrounding jungle. They gazed horror-struck at each other, immobilized by what they had just witnessed on the seeming paradise. Better far the radioactive hell of the sentinel planetoids than the evil and sinister utopia, where lovely flowers glowed and ripe fruits gleamed enticingly on every tree, they told themselves inwardly, and where the plants were cannibals who hunted and ate their victims with almost humanoid cunning and accuracy. One thought only was uppermost in all their minds: which one of them would be the first victim? And how and when were they ever to escape from Zilda before the plants got hold of them? Chapter 2. The Battle with the Flowers. "There's only one chance to get airborne again," Quain said tensely later on that evening, as the crew of the Arcticus, huddled around the ship and surrounded by a circle of flame from blazing naphtha flares as a barrier of protection against the killer plants surrounding them, discussed the next plan of action. "We'll have to patch up the leaking fuel tanks and try to make the moon. By tomorrow, she will be nearer to Zilda than any other time this month." Bleak, barren and icy as were the craters of the moon, the terrestrians knew it would at least be free from this sinister vegetation whose invisible menace surrounded them in the treacherous jungle. Casimir Quain, a skilled astronomist, as were all the navigators of spaceships in the galaxy, knew that the gravitational pull of the moon, strong enough to affect the tides of faraway Terrace Major, would be well able to magnetize the Arcticus and suck the spaceship into the lunar orbit once it was safely outside the slighter gravitational pull of Zilda. Damaged as were the fuel tanks, it would be no simple operation to take off from Zilda and attain the essential speed that would carry them out of the atmospheric belt of the planetoid and the 1.75 million kilometers into the vaster orbit of the moon. Menaced as they were by hostile plants and completely without facilities for repairing the Arcticus, the prospects of getting off Zilda looked pretty black, although none of the stranded 10 were willing to admit this openly to the others. Next time on Weird Planet. I remember something I learned on the University of Mars when graduating for my science degree, that Thor Thorson, who was exiled here after his unsuccessful rebellion against the Jovian dominions, was an expert transmuter of the old school and had discovered how to disintegrate molecular energy and transmute it into a different shape altogether. That was how he succeeded in staging his rebellion against the 5 planets, with milliards of robot automatons reintegrated with vegetable molecules and animated by dynamo hypnotension. Great horned diacolitedons! It's a woman, and a Venusian one at that! We all heard that your spaceship had been disintegrated by the asteroids on the rim. No message was received at headquarters on the telecom, so naturally no search parties were sent out to investigate your disappearance. Modern terrestrians are going to prove a much tougher proposition than your father, Miss Vassal, and if they do succeed in eating us, I'll lay 10 to 1 we'll give those nasty bits of vegetable matter the worst indigestion in the galaxy. Help! For God's sake, shoot this thing!